If you got the Bible app, you can download that for free. Or if you don't have it, you can download it for free. And so my best friend from college, his name is Chris Simpson. He's paraplegic, which means he's paralyzed from his upper thighs down. So he gets around by wheelchair. And he was in charge of something in the mid-90s. He was the dean of a week of Christian camp once a summer, where it was adults and kids who had disabilities of all kinds. And so it might be a disability like him, where, paraplegic or quadriplegic or whatever. But there were also kids who were autistic and Down syndrome, and adults who had Down syndrome. Different. It was all kinds. It was a wide variety of issues and struggles and special needs and all that kind of stuff. And so he was the dean, just meaning he was in charge of the volunteers and the programming for that week at camp for a few years in the mid-90s. But the camp had the worst name, and I was always like, can you use your sway to change the name? It was called Handy Camp, which was just the worst ever. And I was like, it's terrible. He's like, I can't change it. It happens around the country, different camps. It's not just mine. And so he's like, it's like a thing. And so I would always hear stories from him about some of these awesome students and adults, and several I've met, and some I knew and even went to church with. But there were some at camp where he would tell me the story throughout the year to the next summer. Like, oh man, this kid was so awesome. And if they were autistic, they might, for instance, have like a phrase or a sentence that they would repeat often. That was kind of their personality. It was like the way they would communicate or the thing that they would be thinking about. And so, we'd learn these quotes and associate them with a certain student or camper. And so there was one particular camper whose name was Will. And I believe it was in summer 95, that he met Will. Will came to his camp. And Will had a counselor assigned to him, as they all did. And it was a mutual friend of me and Chris's, whose name was Leanne Fenwick. And she's this super bubbly, smiley, energetic, height of a Smurf, just little thing. And she was the counselor for Will. And Will, at the beginning of the week, was rocking out to a Walkman. A Walkman is a cassette player, and with headphones, but they aren't earbuds, they're headphones. They're like spongy, cost 1/10 of a cent to make. They go on your ears. And so he's listening, Will is highly functional on the autism spectrum, highly functional, friendly, fun, easy to care for, all that kind of stuff. And so Will's rocking out to a Walkman. And Leanne's, just getting to know her campers early in the week. And she always says, hey, Will, what are you listening to? And Will stop, real straight face, takes his headphones off. He looks up at her. He says, it's a mix. And she was like, okay. So what song you listening to right now? It's a mix. And that was all he gave her. So the whole week, they interacted that way. She would see him on the Walkman, and she said he was listening to it all the time. And she'd be like, hey, Will, what you listening to over there, buddy? It's a mix. He's probably thinking, this is not getting through to this girl. I should be her counselor because she's struggling right now. And so I heard about Will and all that. It's just like, oh man, for a whole year I heard about. Now what was happening was he had a mixtape. And someone who loved Will put together a mixtape that sent him to his happy place. He loved music all the time. So whatever was on there, it was just a mix of the stuff that Will loved. And he could put on his Walkman, his headphones, and just listen and rock out to that. Well, 1996, I was doing an internship in Louisville, Kentucky. And this particular camp that my buddy led was always at White Mills Christian Camp, about an hour south of Louisville. I was doing an internship in Louisville, and I was like, dude, can I come down for a couple of hours and just hang out at camp with you guys? It's like, oh, that'd be awesome. So the only time I've ever gotten to do it, I got the privilege of showing up at this camp. I'm doing everything I can not to say handy camp. I hate that name so bad. So I show up at this camp, and for like a lunch and a couple of hours in the afternoon, I got to see some of the students and campers I already knew and meet some who I had heard about for, all year, the last couple of years, that kind of stuff. And I'm walking around with Chris. We get to the cafeteria, and I just have this foggy memory of this moment where Chris is like, dude, we all call each other dude. Dude, what, dude? Dude, it's your boy. And I was like, who? He's like, that's Will, sitting down in the cafeteria at one of these like lunch tables, basically. I was like, oh my gosh, I'll be right back. And so I leave Chris, I go over all by myself, and I was like, hey, excuse me. And Will's rocking out the headphones. And he turns around and looks at me. He's like, hey, my name's Dan. I was like, I'm best friends with that crazy dude over there. He's like, gave me the head nod, like, okay, you're safe then, And I was like, yeah, so my name's Dan. I was like, you're Will, right? He shook his head, yeah. I was like, so what are you listening to? It's a mix. And I was like, yes, he said it to me. I got the mix. I do. Said it to me so often. So now, over the years now, anytime me and Chris I'm visiting him in Louisville or he's visiting me in Cleveland, riding around the car, song playing, I'm like, dude, what you listening to? It's a mix. And so it's always the case. So if you were to ask me after the service, Dan, I don't know much about the Bible. This says you're in the book of Psalms in the Bible, in the series. What is the book of Psalms? My answer to you would be, it's a mix. Because it's different authors of different songs or psalms or poems collected that are different genres and different moods, and they're all connected in this collected in this big book of 150 psalms, and it's a mix of all these different psalms, and it's really, really kind of cool depending on, what mood you might be in and need to connect. And so that's the series we're in. Last week we did a sad song. And then this week we're doing a celebration song, as you heard from Cool and the gang, and Andre and Shannon and Sean and the gang. Yeah, that was awesome. That was, by the way, the most enthusiasm we've ever had for a pre-service song. And what else was there? Oh, the most enthusiasm we've ever had for the Second Timer t-shirt. So we're going to freak out every weekend. I know. I do. Some people are like, yeah. Other people are like, no. No. How was the response to us doing, when you announced we were doing Freak Out every weekend? It's a mix. It's a mix. So anyways, the next week, really the series is on-ramping to Thanksgiving. We don't do that enough. Like, I want to do a series that on-ramps to Thanksgiving, not just Christmas. So next week is a Thanksgiving song, and that's the reason we're doing the whole series, was kind of leading up to that. But today we're talking about a celebration song. So you can turn to Psalms, Book of Psalms, Psalm 81. In the Bible app, that would be really easy to do. I'll be doing the NIV. So this psalm is written by a guy named Asaph. And Asaph was one of the people commissioned by the king of Israel, whose name at the time was David. And he was in charge of one of David's 3 choirs that basically led worship in the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And so I'm going to ask you to do something that I don't usually do. If you're comfortable with it, read the first 3 verses out loud with me. Let me give you 2 words, though, that you might stumble or hesitate on. The first one is timbrel, which is a tambourine, okay? So kind of what Andre, I think, was up here rocking out. Somebody had a timbrel or a tambourine. The other one is L-Y-R-E, and it's pronounced lyre. It means a politician or a preacher, or in this case, a stringed instrument, okay? And so it's kind of like a guitar back in the day. So the heading, I'll read this by myself first. The heading says, for the director of music, according to the Gittith. Hebrew scholars have no idea what that word means. They're like, we don't know what that means. But it's of Asaph, meaning he's the one who wrote it. So let's read together. Sing for joy to God our strength. Shout aloud to the God of Jacob. Begin the music. Strike the timbrel. Play the melodious harp and lyre. Sound the ram's horn at the new moon. And when the moon is full on the day of our festival. Very well done. Give yourselves a round of applause. So I can read. So this, it's hard to categorize sometimes what is the genre of a particular psalm in those 150. This one we're going to call a celebration song or a celebration psalm. This is the Cool and the Gang contribution to the scriptures. And there's a few of them, but this is one of them. This is the celebrate good times. Come on. We're going to have a good time tonight. Celebrate. It's all right. We're going to celebrate and party with you. Okay, so this is a celebration psalm. There's a biblical scholar named Walter Zorn who says, okay, Psalm 81 has 2 parts. And this first part is what he calls God's call to celebration, meaning this is God inviting you, your call to celebrate. Okay, so the beginning of it is all about God saying, okay, come celebrate. This is what it's about. This is a call to celebration. So, and this is big celebration with fervor, with excitement. The King James, Old King James Version says at the beginning in verse 1, sing aloud and make a joyful noise. Just like get ruckus, like this is a celebration. In the early years of Momentum, one of my favorite worshipers was a lady named Angie Campbell. And Angie Campbell, when we met in Cinemark Theater in Valley View, we would transform the auditorium into worship space, and we'd transform 3 other theaters into Mo Kids space. And so we'd worship, and there was one particular Sunday, say 2007, where the band was introducing a new worship song that our church hadn't sang together before. So it was new to a lot of people, and we had never done it together. So there's that time at the end of the song where like the last note is like fading, and then there's just one moment of silence before people start applauding at the end of the song. There's just that one moment, in like the third row, Angie Campbell, one of my favorite worshipers at Momentum, all of a sudden, just drinking in that song, went, in that silent moment, I like that. And everybody in the theater busted laughing. And she didn't mean for everybody to hear her. It just was at that moment, like, oh man, but she didn't care. She's laughing up. That became an iconic moment at Momentum, that anytime I was preaching on worship or praise, I would have to throw in a little story about Angie Campbell. I like that. And so loved it. Well, now Angie Campbell's son, Jason, he goes to Momentum. He's right down here in third row. What are you talking about? For real? That's for real. Jason Campbell. And a few weeks ago, he was listening to the message, and straight up, he doesn't remember who was even preaching. Was it me, a guest speaker? The point was, it was the message, and he was vibing with it. He was feeling it. Like, he was like, man, I like this. And in the middle of the message, he suddenly went, I like that. And my wife, Shannon, turned around, smiled, and looked at him real slow. And he said, at first, I thought maybe I was being too loud. And I was like, then it hit me. I was like, oh, my gosh. It took me back to 2007, like I am my mom. Like, I like that. And he's like, I can't even believe that. But he was raised by a godly woman who taught him to verbally express during worship and the message. And so that's kind of what this is about, is God saying, this is my call for you to celebrate. Like, verbally interact, sing aloud, like make noise. And so this is what this is really kind of about here, is sing aloud, make a joyful noise. So it's a challenge to speak. It's a challenge to sing out. It's a challenge to express. In fact, verse 1 and 2 in this call to worship, it's basically about 2 things. It's basically like sing and shout, and the other is like make music, play instruments. Sing and shout, like, you guys can do that. And then we're helped in worship and led in worship by people who can play music and play instruments. And, what's funny is when it comes to like church and worship and like what you like about Sunday morning, people's taste buds are different. They have different temperaments, different, people like different kinds of music, and some don't prefer much music at all. Some are like Will, like they want it all the time, like, it's a mix, I love it. So like, people are different, but here's the funny thing is, some of you, if you were to be truthful, and you don't have to, but some of you, if you're truthful, you can't stand the sermon. Like, you're like, the sermon, like, oh man, I can't stand the sermon. But God, through the music, is kind of tricking you into hearing teaching from God's word, from the scripture, preaching. Now, on the other side, there are other people who just absolutely can't stand the singing and the worship and that part of the service. But the funny thing is, like, God, through the preaching of the word, is kind of tricking you into learning what it means to worship. That makes sense? And so you might be like, I love both. You might be like, I hate both. What are you doing here? I love communion. Give me a snack. But yeah, I like that. But like it could be one or the other. But here's the thing is, God's using the thing that you love to challenge you, not just to ignore the other thing, but to grow in it. To be like, okay, I can't sing. I'm not necessarily expressive. I don't like clapping my hands. But God's calling you to celebration through the thing that you're like, that's the one that I love. But I can't just be complacent and use the excuse, that's not my preference. God's calling you to do both, to be a student of his word and his instruction, and to be someone who isn't afraid to express and to celebrate what God is doing in our church or throughout history or in my life. And that's so here's some simple things you can do. Like, when it's time to like celebrate God through worship or praise, one simple thing is just to be like, you got to get your mind like, you got to do some work. And it might be to say, okay, I'm just going to try to picture God And at the worst, if I can't picture, of course, because there's no image of like, here's what God looks like and, what color the beard is. No, that's just our imaginations. But if you need to picture human Jesus, God in the flesh, that's fine. But I'm picturing that I'm singing to God and that he's pleased with my praise, that he's pleased with my celebration. Because what I'm doing in that moment is I'm not focusing on me, I'm focusing on God, and that pleases God, that you would take the focus off of yourself and be humble enough to worship your Creator and to celebrate your Creator. So to picture God and to picture him especially being pleased with any kind of offering you are trying to bring as you express yourself. And to try to sing out loud, to say, I'm going to look at the lyrics, I'm going to focus on what they're saying, I'm going to think about what they're saying. And sure, if you're new to church, even if you're old to church, there might be phrases you're like, I'm not really sure what that just meant right there, or what it was alluding to. But that you try to kind of like, chew on those lyrics as you sing them and try to express them and think about them. It might be those verbal things like the, I like that. It might be that kind of stuff that isn't in the lyrics that you contribute to worship. As Shannon's dad, my father-in-law, he's a country preacher. He'd call it hooting and hollering, like it's the stuff, the woots that go on during, the thing that people are like, that's expressing, that's celebration. That happens naturally when you're celebrating something. You hoot and you holler and you woot and all that kind of stuff because you're excited and you're celebrating. It might be a stretch for some of you, might be to clap your hands. And I know there are people at Momentum. Who can't keep a beat. I know that. So you might make less noise by doing this, okay, whatever. It's okay. I think it's often cute, that one person that's just way off. You're like, oh, you do it, sweet sister. You do it, That's okay. It's okay. But you might do this. You might tap your toe. But in some way that you're like, for me, this is stretching. For me, this is celebrating. And I'm taking a step for me. It might be, if you're comfortable with it, to raise your hands to God, which is a way just to say, I submit to you, God. I am the child. You are my heavenly Father. And I submit to you. And it might be bouncing up and down at times, during worship, a celebration song. It might be dancing. It might be any of that stuff. But to say, okay, I'm gonna stretch myself to express my praise and celebration and worship to God in a way that's a stretch for me. Back in 2011, I snagged an article from Science News, a magazine, and it reported that there was a team of psychologists at the University of Montreal who had discovered something for the first time. And this was a scientific journal that they recorded it in eventually. And so they said they found a guy, it was a 23-year-old man named Matthew, spelled Mathieu, so that kind of Matthew. And so they discovered a 23-year-old man named Matthew that was the first documented case of a person that they said was wholly unable to feel a musical beat. So they're like, we found the guy. Like, this guy doesn't feel the beat at all, okay? Not at all. And he didn't have the ability to move in time with the beat. And so the scientists reported in this journal article that Matthew sings in tune, but merely flails with his body, bouncing up and down much more randomly than people who are merely poor dancers. So they're like, there's a beat, and I mean, he's full on Elaine from Seinfeld. He's like, he's not even close to the Caucasian invasion. He's like, it's Stan in that video. It's like, you aren't even close. It's like there isn't even a beat playing. Like there's something totally different going on in your head. And maybe you're like, that's why I don't praise and celebrate, because I'm Matthew. I came from Canada. I'm here. I don't sing because I can't carry a tune, or I don't clap because I have no rhythm. Well, here's the deal. Here's the good news about worshiping Jesus. That matters at homecoming, right? That matters in the club. That matters at a wedding reception, because I've seen some Matthews at some wedding receptions. You know what I'm saying. But it doesn't matter at worship, because who's the audience? There's one audience. The one audience. And when you learn to worship, it really is about saying, I'm not worried about what other people are thinking about me. As weird as it is, not even my girlfriend, not even my spouse, I'm not worried. I have an audience of one. And God is so pleased with me, even when I'm not singing on pitch, because it's a joyful noise. The only contribution I'm bringing is joyful. It's just a noise, It's like, that's not on pitch. It's not joyfully nailing the note. It's a joyful noise. Okay? He made some noise over there. But that doesn't matter in worship. It's saying I might be offbeat. I might be off pitch, but I'm expressing and celebrating to God, and God is pleased with that kind of praise, and that's what matters in worship. I want to point out two things in verse 3. So it says, sound the ram's horn at the new moon, and when the moon is full, on the day of our festival. So two things there. One, ram's horn. I've done whole sermons on the ram's horn before, so I'll make this brief. But the ram's horn, sometimes it's called a trumpet, but it is not our brass instrument that we picture. It is something you blow in, but it's not even really an instrument. It really is like a signaling device. It's like a bullhorn. It's like what the Ewoks used when they came out. It has like 2 or 3 pitches, and that's it. It's not something you play in a tune or you can do a chord with. Nothing like that. And so the ram's horn was sounded before battles. If you know the Bible, before the fall of Jericho, they sounded a ram's horn. Before Gideon's battle, sounded a ram's horn. On the other end, the other thing it was used for was to tell people it's time to party. Like for the festivals in the Bible, this is what an Ewok came out of in the middle of Israel. Like, what is that? I don't know, but it's party time, y'all. And so the festival would start, and that would be the thing that would be like, it's time to celebrate. Here comes a celebration song, and it's kicked off with the ram's horn. Then out comes the timbrels, and out comes the lyre, and all that kind of stuff. And so they start, moving and, boogieing and all that stuff. The second thing in verse 3 is this. Okay, got ram's horn. The other is at the end, he talks about how, okay, get ready to do this, sound the ram's horn, and this is what you're to do at your festival. Now, even that alone, the word festival, the root word it comes from in Hebrew is a word that means, what does he mean by festival? He means sit down and fold your fingers, No, festival in Hebrew comes from the same root word as to dance or to move around in a circle. It's like a country hoedown going on, to move around in a circle. Or even this, I love this, to be giddy. I'm like giggling and I'm laughing. We're having a blast. It's people enjoying each other and God and feasting and celebrating something specific that God has done for them, or an event from the past where God did something awesome. In fact, the timbrel, that tambourine thing, that was typically in ancient times played by ladies. And if someone was playing a timbrel, it meant people were dancing. They were usually playing timbrels in like a procession for a victory that just happened. And they're rocking these timbrels, and as people are dancing while that's happening, that was the percussion that kept beat for people to dance. So Walter Zorn, that scholar, says, this means, just by mentioning this festival and that we're celebrating and the call to celebrate, it means to celebrate the feast with enthusiasm. Like, it's time to get pumped. It is time to get hyped. Okay, a few years ago, Momentum's very own Jack Speth. Jack Speth. And Nathan Liu, front rowers. They used to have a YouTube channel that they worked on together, and it's pretty awesome. But in their words, I'm quoting from them, in their words, we used to be hit YouTubers. Basically, we had 40 subscribers, which is crazy. So they're pretty stoked. But they would make these videos together on YouTube and their channel. It's pretty awesome. But for one video, Nathan Liu, a.k.a. Nate the Great, he came out and they were introducing themselves, and Nate came out hyped. I mean, he came out hyped, just bringing the energy. And you'll see in just a second, Jack's authentic response to, he was just blown away by the level that Nate came out. And so he's like, whoa, he's taken back by, you got to see the clip. It's kind of recirculating among our student ministry right now, being quoted. It's all the rage. Check it out.
Hey guys, welcome back to another Dance Red Productions video. I'm Jack.
And I'm Nate the Great!
Enthusiasm, let's go!
Yeah. I love so much Jack's response in his face. It's like, whoa, enthusiasm, let's go. But here's the deal. Nate knows, okay, we're doing a video for YouTube. It's time to bring the hype, man. Like, it's time to bring the energy. Like, so I'm making the decision. This is how I'm going in, okay? And Jack's like, whoa, you went in strong, Dang, that was awesome. And so that's what the psalm is really about. It's celebrating with Enthusiasm. Let's go. It's time to celebrate. Let's do this. So in verse 1 through 3, it's like sing for joy, shout it loud, begin the music, sound the ram's horn. And then Psalm 81 takes a move here that is really interesting. The next two verses, 4 and 5, say this. This is a decree. Huh? This is a decree for Israel, an ordinance of the God of Jacob. When God went out against Egypt, he established it as a statute for Joseph. Now, wait a minute. We've been just like, okay, the timbrel, the instruments, sing aloud, rams, start, all this stuff's going on. Then all of a sudden, why does it sound so strange and bossy here? Why does it sound so official, like legal language is being used? This is an ordinance and a decree. This is super interesting to me, okay? And now, granted, I'm a nerd, so things interest me that won't interest you if you're not a nerd. But I'm a nerd, and it interests me. So many scholars think that Psalm 81 was used for a particular festival, a particular feast. It's called the Feast of Tabernacles, or the festival, those are interchangeable, of Tabernacles. And I won't get into the details of that feast today, but it was one of the major, still is, Jewish festivals. In fact, my buddy Tim Jones, who preaches here about once a year, funny dude, comedy writer, pal of mine, he just went to Israel. So happy for him. He got to go for his first time ever. And as a preacher, to see all these places that you preached about. But he went in late October, and the Feast of Tabernacles is an autumn kind of harvest festival feast. And so he went during the Feast of Tabernacles because it's September, October that happens. And so what I want you to see, this is very interesting. When you go back to God's command about what Psalm 81 was written for, this feast, this festival, this is what God says originally about this Feast of Tabernacles. It says this, Deuteronomy 16. Celebrate the festival of tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce and your threshing floor and your winepress. Verse 14, be joyful at your festival. Be joyful at your festival. For 7 days, celebrate the festival to the Lord our God. So verse 13 says celebrate. Command, by the way. Verse 14, be joyful at your festival. Other English translations that are accurate would be like, you shall rejoice at your festival. Verse 15, for 7 days celebrate, people. Like, so this isn't like, oh man, God's like really laying down the law about these ordinances and decrees and these laws. Yeah, he's telling you to party for 7 days. He's like, okay, call to celebrate. When we do this festival, y'all better have fun. Y'all better enjoy each other and remember what I did for you and celebrate what I've done for you. Like, celebrate it for 7 days. Be joyful. And to get really nerdy, the Hebrew word there, I don't know how you pronounce it necessarily, but it's like Samiach. And today still, Jews use that word, but the modern word is just used to basically mean happy. But back in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures, it was something God often commanded that is often translated, rejoice and be glad. Notice the choice there. Rejoice and be glad. So you must celebrate. You are to rejoice. You are to celebrate. So God commands that we do this thing. And this is what it tells me, and I think this is the main takeaway, at least for me this morning, is this. Is celebration isn't necessarily something that you feel. It's something that you can willingly switch on. God wouldn't command it. If you couldn't say, all right, I'm going into the YouTube videos, time to get hype. I'm Nate the Great. I'm going to bring it, okay? Like, that's what God's saying is it's time to celebrate and rejoice and be glad. It's a call to celebrate. Come do it. Rejoicing isn't optional. Celebration is a command. It's time to celebrate. Now, here's what I mean by that. Because we worship emotions in our culture. Unlike other cultures and times of history, we're like, if I feel it, it's what's true, you know. And God's like, okay, but you can turn up, and you know you can. If you want to turn up, you know you can. And so there's two types of celebration. One is the type when something happens, and in the moment, you're like, whoa, and you automatically celebrate, right? Like, dang, like someone very graciously gave me and my son Journey tickets to Monday Night Football on October 31st to see the Browns spank the Bengals. It was incredible. So good. Oh, stay down, Burrow, and you feel that. Do you have an offensive line? Nobody showed up out here to protect you. And so so me and Journey, we didn't have to conjure up emotion. We were like, Myles Garrett crushed him again. Oh my goodness, yes, his limb is over there. Like we didn't have to conjure it up. It was in the moment of celebration. That's one type of celebration. But there's another type of celebration, which is largely what we're talking about here, and that's this. Other times, you celebrate something from the past because it's worth remembering over and over again, right? And so when you do that, basically what's happened is you're saying, I willfully choose to switch this on because right now it's time, okay? So for instance, a wedding anniversary, if you're married, it's time to remember that X amount of years ago we got married. Or if you got a kid and they have a birthday or a sibling who has a birthday, you say on that day, we're going to celebrate that. If you have a little kid, you don't be like, man, I just don't feel like it today. Hey, we're not doing your birthday today. What? Because you choose as a parent, even when you're exhausted and there's stuff going on, you got to work all day, whatever, you come home like, it's time to switch it on. This is worth remembering. This is worth celebrating. So I'm going to do, because I'm a big person, I'm going to do the emotional work and the mental work I have to remember why this is special, why this is important. And that's what that kind of celebrating is. You have to think, you have to remember, you have to appreciate, maybe discuss, conjure up the emotion of why is it that we are celebrating this again and again and again. Now, it's the same with God. It's the same with celebrating God in worship. There's two things that can happen. One is something spontaneous that you don't have to conjure it up. Someone you know or love, that you've been praying for, that you've been invited, whatever, gets baptized into Christ because they want to follow Jesus and they want to accept his grace and they believe what Jesus has done. And you're like, dang, that was awesome. I've been waiting so long for that kid, that student, that adult. That's so incredible to get baptized. And someone comes up out of the water and we're all like, yeah. And we start celebrating. That's because we're in that moment. That's a victory right there at that moment. And there's so many other spiritual victories like that where you just come out maybe from a conversation, you're like, oh my gosh, that person never gets real. They just asked me spiritual questions where their whole life is typically a facade. And man, it's so incredible. Like praise God for that happening. But on other times, when you're not in the moment, there is a way that you celebrate, and this is typically what we're talking about with worship and celebration. There's other times where you say, okay, it's Thanksgiving, it's time to be thankful, right? Most people don't wake up on that Thursday and say, I don't feel like it today. Let's do it next Thursday. I work next Thursday. Yeah, I know, but I'm not feeling it. No, you turn it on. You say it's Thanksgiving. It is time to pause and remember and be thankful. You say it's Christmas. It's time to be generous. Because our God, if you follow Jesus, our God was generous to us. He sent his one and only son. For God so loved the world that he gave. So it's Christmas time. Man, it's time to be generous. I don't really feel like being generous right now or whatever. It's Christmas time. It's time to be generous. And this is the big one, and I think every follower of Jesus, including me, needs this reminder. This is what it means. It's saying it's Sunday. Man, it's the day of the week that Jesus rose from the grave, conquered death. Man, it's time to celebrate Jesus and the resurrection. And that's why Christians worship on Sunday. It's because that's the day of the week that Jesus rose from the dead. So every Sunday is like I remember. I do the mental work to conjure up. Why is this day important? Why do we gather on Sunday? We gather because we have a risen Savior, and we say, okay, man, it's time. It's Sunday. It's time to rejoice. Let's be honest. Celebration takes effort. Celebration means effort. Anytime you're going to celebrate something that isn't happening in the moment, it means I have to do the emotional and the mental work, and I have to kind of go through that to prepare. If you have a friend or a loved one that doesn't ever even text you on your birthday, say they live out of state, they don't text you or call ever. Not like they missed a year because they were busy or forgetful. They just don't do it. Or you live with someone that's just like, man, they don't hardly acknowledge my birthday. It's like, you get a happy birthday. It's like, no, you conclude one of a couple things maybe. One is that they're just lazy. Like, yeah, I do love you. I didn't feel like doing anything. I mean, it's your birthday, cool. Hey, happy birthday, happy birthday. But they're just too lazy to put some worth into it. Or the other thing, and maybe including that, is you start to realize, man, maybe I'm not as important to them as I thought I was, right? That's how you feel, and that's how sometimes you can get down on your birthdays. Like, man, there's a couple particular people I thought would remember me, but year after year, not just once, they don't. And think about that with worship now. So the connection with worship is like on Sunday mornings, there's many Sunday mornings where I come in and I don't feel like celebrating. I don't feel like worshiping, but I know that it's something I can switch on. I can do the mental and emotional work, and if I don't do that, then what am I? I'm lazy. I'm being lazy. Like, I don't have enough coffee in me. Just it's been hard. It's been a hard weekend. Just don't find this best. Like, I was with all these smelly middle school boys, and I was like, just hanging out. So the idea is like, oh man, the truth, the self-revelation is, I'm lazy. I'm choosing not to do the work to celebrate that kind of celebration. The other thing is I can sometimes just picture God being like, it's just because I'm not as important to you as you think I am, right? Like I'm way more concerned about what people around me might think about me celebrating, or it's just too much effort, it's too much thought I have to put into it, and I'd rather just sit here, stand here, and be lazy. I'm just not as important to you as you like to pretend that I am. And so it's the same with worship, is if you are close to God, you will put the mental and emotional thought into, it's time to celebrate what God has done throughout history and in our church and in my life, and to say there are things there to be celebrated. It's time to celebrate. There's a Bible scholar named Dr. Carl Amerding. And by the way, if your name is Amerding, your only option is to become a Bible scholar. I'm just telling you right now. Like, no woman's going to marry you, first off, for that name. But he's a professor in Old Testament in Austria, and he says this. He says, in Deuteronomy 16, the Feast of Tabernacles, what Psalm 81 is about, he says the emphasis is entirely on the quality of worship. Like, celebrate. Enjoy your festival. Celebrate your festival. It's all in the quality. And he says true relationship with God is to be done joyfully with a voluntary response. So the idea is just to say, man, what we're talking about, celebration, it isn't about did you do it, it's the quality of worship. Not just did I show up. What was the quality of me tapping into my celebration of what God is worth to me and what he has done for me and how he has loved me first, and therefore I love him in response. That's what it's about, is that quality. Let me give you one thing this week to celebrate from Momentum. Last week, Lauren Love, our student ministry director, who is in charge of Freak Out this weekend and did an amazing job, by the way. Lauren Love, LL. All right, so thank you to L Boogie. So she texted the whole staff last week, and she said this. She goes, hey, I'm thinking about this. She said, recently, Jeremy Kunka texted me and said, hey, can the young adult ministry make some treats for the middle school, high school students at Freak Out? So Jeremy Kunka graduated a couple of school years ago, and he's now leads a young adult ministry called Hey Ya, and it's for like 18 to 26-year-olds. And he was like, hey, Freak Out's going on. I used to go to that when I was in high school. And maybe we can make a treat, something that I often make for my friends that people like. Maybe our whole group could do that, make these treats for middle schoolers and high schoolers at Freak Out. And so Lauren was like, not only is that cool, she was like, but I started thinking about this. She said, recently, whether you know this or not, this is true, so you're hearing it now. Our adult Mo groups, our small group communities, they recently put together care packages for the young adult ministry, Hey Ya. She was like, now Hey Ya is saying, can we make some treats for the middle school, high school students at Freak Out? And really recently, in October, the high school, middle schoolers, Amplify Student Ministry, they just hosted our very first ever trunk or treat event for Mo kids, which is birth to fifth grade. So she was like, we've got this like serving in the name of Jesus serving train going on, from adult Mo groups to young adult Mo group ministry to the students to Mo kids. So now Mo kids is going to come in and give us back rubs. Come on in, guys. No, I'm just playing. You look, I saw you look. You look, I saw you look. You look. But it's just this amazing train of one serving the other, another serving the other. I'm like, man, when I saw that text from Lauren, I was like, praise God. Like, I want to be a part of a church like that, and I get to be a part of a church like that. How cool is that? Let me wrap up with this. The last part of the psalm, which I'm just going to spend 1 minute on. The last part of the psalm is an oracle from God, basically, a prophetic utterance, where God responds. And he basically says this. If you skim through the rest of it, it's basically God saying, man, if my people will listen to me, if my people will listen to me, if my people will follow my instruction, listen, heed my teaching, if they'll follow. Then there's even a part in verse 11 where he says, my people, they would not listen to me. And the theme is, listen to me. And so he goes through this theme of like, man, listen to me. I wish, man, if you will heed my instruction, my direction, all that kind of stuff. And so Walter Zorn, that scholar, said the first part is God's call to celebration. He said, and the second part is God's call to dedication. And what that means is a lot of people say the rest of the psalm is basically being used during that festival for people to recommit, kind of to rededicate themselves to their agreement, their relationship with God. And I think that's a beautiful way to think about when we celebrate on Sunday morning, when we worship, is every Sunday can be a Sunday of rededication, of recommitment, where if you remember, if it comes to mind, you're like, man, this week, man, I've been beat up in so many ways, and I just feel like but God, I rededicate myself to you. I'm not trying to please people in this world. I'm trying to please you. And I'm going to rededicate myself. I follow Jesus. Or maybe you made some really stupid mistakes this week, and it's not something that you're like, oh, man, I'm proud of what I did. You're like, man, that is not who God made me to be, and I blew it, I stumbled, I fell, but I am covered. If I follow Jesus, I'm covered by the grace of Jesus, and I lean on that grace, and I say, God, I know I made mistakes this week, but because I'm covered by your grace, I recommit to you. I say, I follow Jesus, and I trust him for my forgiveness and grace. And that every Sunday, as you worship and celebrate, can also be a time not just of celebration, but of rededication. To say, man, maybe I've blown it for a few months. Maybe I've wandered away from church. Maybe freakout's what brought me back. Today, Lord, I rededicate myself to following Jesus. Let's pray.